Mike Tyson terrified the world, but the boy inside him had known fear long before anyone called him Iron Mike. He became the youngest heavyweight champion in boxing history, a human storm who made the ring feel smaller the moment he stepped through the ropes. Speed, pressure, fear. Under the blinding lights of Las Vegas, he knocked down giants and turned Cus D'Amato's peekaboo style into a language the whole world understood. But the more completely Tyson conquered boxing, the less protected he became from everything waiting outside the ropes. The throne shook, the headlines darkened, and the man once called the baddest on the planet entered battles no trainer could prepare him for. Now at 60, Mike Tyson still lives beside the echoes of a past that never fully left him. Before we begin, honor this unforgettable boxing warrior with a like and subscribe for more powerful stories behind the legends who survived the roar. On a worn Brownsville rooftop, before the black trunks, before the championship belt, before arenas learned to lower their voices when Mike Tyson entered, there was a small boy standing near pigeon cages, listening to wings move in the city air. Mike Tyson was born on June 30th, 1966, in Brooklyn, New York, and childhood did not greet him with softness. Brownsville gave him noise, pressure, hunger, stairwells that seemed colder than the street, and rooms where a child learned to watch faces before he learned to trust them. His mother, Lorna Tyson, carried the household with little room for rest. The man connected to his fatherhood was gone from the daily shape of his life, early, leaving absence as one of the first languages Tyson understood. Long before the world saw opponents staring across the ring at him with dread, Tyson himself knew fear. He was shy. His voice made him a target. His body drew comments before it drew respect. He lowered his head when laughter found him, and the public image that later became Iron Mike was still only a boy trying to disappear inside a neighborhood that rarely looked away. The pigeons gave Tyson a kind of peace that people did not always know how to offer. They were small, nervous, alive, and they returned to him with a loyalty the streets rarely promised. On the roof, with the cages rattling lightly and the city breathing below, he could stand beside fragile creatures and feel less fragile for a while. That detail matters because the later image of Mike Tyson became so hard and so loud that it almost swallowed the boy who once needed tenderness. Brownsville taught him to protect himself before anyone taught him discipline. Trouble found him early, and he drifted through a childhood marked by street pressure, shame, and the machinery of juvenile detention. By the time he reached Tryon School for Boys, a place that held many young lives already bent by the world, Tyson had become a child people were prepared to judge before they were prepared to understand. Yet inside that institution, Bobby Stewart saw a force that had not yet been shaped. Stewart, a former boxer and counselor, recognized the raw power in Tyson's body, the quickness buried under anger and fear, and the possibility that the same boy who had been pushed around might learn to stand with purpose. There is a quiet cruelty in that kind of discovery. Sometimes a child is seen only when he can become useful to a demanding world. Still, for Tyson, Stewart's attention opened a door. The first gym did not need to look grand to feel like destiny. A bag hanging in front of him, a pair of old shoes on the floor, the smell of sweat and canvas, the thud of leather landing in rhythm. These were ordinary things, yet they offered Tyson a structure the streets had never given him. Every step toward boxing pulled him farther from the rooftop and closer to a future he could not yet name. Then came the loss that stayed under everything. Lorna Tyson died in 1982, when Tyson was 16, before she could see the full reach of what her son would become. He would later say, "I never saw my mother happy with me and proud of me for doing something." He also remembered that she knew him as a difficult boy running the streets, a memory that lands with a kind of private devastation. That wound did not announce itself loudly. It sat in the corner of a room after the visitors left. It followed a young fighter into training. It waited beside the bed when the body was tired and the mind had nowhere to go. Bobby Stewart led Tyson to Cus D'Amato, and the road began to narrow. Tyson had not found discipline inside the home that raised him. He found it in a room where men measured time by rounds, where a boy who had been afraid of the world was about to meet the man who believed fear could be trained into focus. The gym in Catskill could be cold before morning fully arrived, the kind of cold that made breath visible and turned every sound into instruction. Shoes scraped over the floor. A heavy bag swung back after each hook, leather cracked against canvas. Somewhere near the ropes, Cus D'Amato watched Mike Tyson with the stillness of a man who understood that fear could destroy a fighter long before the first punch landed. Tyson had come to him through Bobby Stewart, carrying the rough strength of Brownsville, the guarded eyes of a boy used to being judged by his mistakes, and a hurt so deep it often came out as anger. Cus saw the damage, but he also saw something rare inside it: timing, leverage, hunger, and a mind that could absorb discipline if the world around it stopped shifting long enough. He had trained great fighters before, including Floyd Patterson, and he knew the ring was never only a place of violence. It was a room where a man either became a prisoner of fear or learned to make fear obey. In Catskill, Tyson entered a life built almost entirely around repetition. The hour mattered, the meal mattered, the road work mattered, the way his hand returned to his cheek mattered. Camille Ewald's home gave him warmth and routine, the sense that after the gym there might be a table, a bed, and a light left on. Kevin Rooney became part of the daily shaping, sharpening the teenager whose body seemed made for impact, but whose spirit still carried the tremors of a frightened child. Cus did not simply put gloves on Tyson and teach him to attack. He taught him how to survive entering danger. Hands high, chin protected, head slipping side to side, knees bent, body low, feet driving forward before an opponent could settle. From far away, the peekaboo style looked compact. Inside it lived a brutal geometry. Tyson would close distance like a door slamming shut. A jab would miss him by inches. Then a counter would rise from below, short, sudden, and heavy enough to change the air in the room. The work was physical, but it was also emotional. Every slip taught him that pressure could be entered without panic. Every step forward told him fear did not have to freeze him. Every command from Cus carried the weight of a father's belief. Tyson would later remember Cus as the man who built his confidence and gave him structure when his life had almost none left. For a boy who had known humiliation before praise, that belief felt like rescue. It also became a burden. The more Cus saw greatness in him, the less room Tyson had to remain ordinary. Childhood became a schedule. Doubt became an opponent. The gym bell became the clock by which his entire life was set. There was tenderness inside that discipline, and there was danger in it too. Tyson was being saved, but he was also being built for a world that would ask everything from him. Other teenagers had slow breakfasts, school noise, careless afternoons, and the luxury of being unfinished. Tyson had road work before sunrise. Bags, mitts, film, correction, sweat drying on his shirt, before the day had fully opened. Cus sat near the ropes, as if guarding a future only he could see. To Tyson, the old man became more than a trainer. He became a father figure, a strategist, a shelter, and the voice that turned a terrified boy's body into a disciplined weapon. Then, on November 4th, 1985, Cus died. The room did not change shape, but everything inside it felt altered. The bag still swung. The shoes still dragged across the floor. Rooney still had work to do. Camille's house still stood. Tyson's hands could still be wrapped, his body could still be sharpened, and the championship was still moving closer. But the man who had drawn the map was gone before the journey reached its brightest light. That was the cruelest timing of Tyson's rise. The person who had taught him how to control fear was no longer there when the whole world began to fear him. Tyson kept training because the machine had already been set in motion. The routines remained, but now each round carried a silence where Cus's voice used to be. The crown was coming. The knockouts were coming. The money, the cameras, the roar, and the chaos were all coming. And the boy from Brownsville was walking toward them with a champion's body, a grieving son's empty space, and no father left to steady the monster the world was about to celebrate. The black trunks made him look almost unfinished at first, as if Mike Tyson had walked into the ring without decoration, because decoration would only slow him down. By 1985, the professional world had started to feel him coming. Opponents did not just lose rounds. They looked as if the room had become too small once Tyson crossed the canvas. He fought with a pressure that seemed to begin before the bell, moving low, fast, and close, carrying Catskill's discipline inside Brownsville's hunger. The early victories built a sound around him: crowd noise, announcer disbelief, reporters leaning closer, cameras catching the stare that would become part of boxing memory. America did not yet know the full cost of that rise. It knew the impact. It knew the suddenness. It knew the way a young heavyweight could turn a fight into a crisis for the man standing across from him. The closer Tyson came to the championship, the more his public image hardened into something larger than a young man. He was becoming an event, and events are rarely allowed to be tired, lonely, or afraid. On November 22, 1986, Trevor Berbick tried to stand in Las Vegas, and history seemed to wobble with him. Tyson was only 20 years and 4 months old. The punches had come with the force of a life compressed into 2 rounds, and when Berbick struggled to rise, the arena understood that a new heavyweight era had arrived. Tyson became the youngest heavyweight champion in history, and the noise around him was enormous, the kind of noise that turns a person into a symbol before he has time to breathe. Belts came, cameras came, the name Iron Mike became a national shorthand for speed, force, and dread. In 1987, Tyson unified the major heavyweight titles, and the victories that followed deepened the myth. Larry Holmes, Tony Tubbs, Michael Spinks, each name became part of the storm, each night adding another layer to the idea that Tyson was less a fighter than a force passing through the division. The Spinks fight in 1988 lasted only long enough to become unforgettable. The crowd had arrived expecting danger and received something closer to stunned disbelief. Tyson stood at the center of it, young, rich, feared, and crowned. Yet the brightest nights carried a private absence. Cus D'Amato had imagined this future, had spoken it into Tyson before the rest of the world believed it, but he was not there to hear Las Vegas roar. After the gloves came off, after the microphones pushed close, after the belts were lifted and the flashbulbs cut the room into pieces of light, there was still a chair that no celebration could fill. Tyson had reached the mountaintop with the speed of a man being chased, and the one person who had taught him how to understand that climb was gone. That is the part of glory the highlight reels cannot hold. The public saw a champion who seemed impossible to stop. In the dressing room, beneath the towel, under the sweat, behind the stare, there was a young man holding a crown heavy enough to bend the neck. Winning did not slow the machine around him. It made the machine louder. The arena wanted more nights, more knockdowns, more proof that Iron Mike was real. Tyson kept giving the world proof. While the distance between the champion people cheered and the young man inside the body kept widening. The lights grew hotter. The name grew larger. Somewhere beneath it, Mike Tyson was still learning how much of himself the crown would take. The older fighter's stool always tells the truth before the scorecards do. Years after the black trunks had made opponents hesitate, Mike Tyson sat under brighter, newer lights with a towel over his shoulders and a body that carried every mile of the road behind him. Heavyweight boxing had given him a kingdom, but it had also written itself into his joints, his breath, his timing, and the space between what his mind commanded and what his body could still deliver. In youth, Tyson's movement had been almost startling. The dip of the head, the sudden step inside, the punch arriving before the other man had finished planning his own. That version of him lived in old footage, with a cruel freshness. The feet seemed spring-loaded, the torso rolled under danger. The counters came like doors slamming shut. Aging did not erase that memory from the public. It made the memory harder for the real man to carry. A crowd can keep a fighter young in its mind. The body refuses that bargain. By the time Tyson returned to the center of a major spectacle against Jake Paul in 2024, the contrast was impossible to miss. The fight had already been delayed after Tyson dealt with an ulcer flare-up, a plain medical phrase that carried a larger meaning for anyone who had watched him across decades. The body that once seemed beyond ordinary limits now needed caution, time, and permission to resume. At AT&T Stadium, the setting was huge, modern, and loud. The gloves were heavier, the rounds were shorter. The event had the shine of a new era, built for streaming screens and viral attention, yet the man walking into the ring carried the old era on his shoulders. He was 58 then, close to 60, and the audience looked at him with two memories at once: the champion who had once arrived like weather, and the older man standing in front of them with slower steps, thicker pauses, and a face that had known too many dressing rooms after midnight. The pain of that night was larger than the result. It lived in the small things, the way a breath took longer to settle, the way an opening closed before the hand could reach it, the way a fighter who had once trusted his body completely now had to negotiate with it in public. There is a particular loneliness in aging as an athlete, because the world keeps the young version of you under glass. Fans replay the knockouts. Broadcasters summon the old adjectives. Posters preserve the stare. Meanwhile, the real body wakes up with its own weather. The old shoes may still fit, but the morning after a workout feels different. The tape around the wrists comes off slower. A towel hangs heavier after a round. A man who once measured time in explosions begins to measure it in recovery. Tyson's late walk to the ring did not make the earlier glory smaller. It made the cost visible. He still stepped forward, still accepted the lights, still allowed the crowd to call the old name. Yet the body in the ring belonged to the present, and the present did not move like 1986. Somewhere between the stool and the final bell, the myth had to share space with age. The crowd went home with images. Tyson went home with the body that had carried all of them. A fighter can hide pain behind gloves for a few rounds. Back in the quiet, when the tape is gone and the arena is empty, the body speaks in a language no crowd can answer. That silence leads toward the rooms where boxing had even less power. The rooms where family waited, worried, left, grieved, or tried to love the man behind the gloves. A championship belt can sit on a table and still fail to warm a room. For Mike Tyson, home was never a simple place outside the arena. The public learned to recognize him by entrance music, lights, stare-downs, and the hard crack of a bell. But the people closest to him had to live with the hours after the cameras left. They saw the suitcase near the door, the training bag half unpacked, the fatigue beneath the fame, the moods that did not fit into a highlight reel. Robin Givens entered Tyson's life during the fever of his early fame, and their marriage in 1988 became one of the most watched private chapters in American sports culture. The televised interview with Barbara Walters left a lasting image. Two people seated close enough for the camera, yet surrounded by a distance the whole country could feel. Their divorce in 1989 became public, painful, and permanent in the record of his life. It would be easy to flatten that period into sides, blame, and noise. The more honest picture is sadder. A very young champion, a young actress, a marriage under extreme attention, and a home unable to breathe beneath the weight of a name that belonged to millions before it could belong safely to the people inside it. Later, Monica Turner became part of Tyson's attempt to build a steadier life after some of his hardest public years. Their marriage held children, routines, and the hope that a home could become more than a place between fights. Yet fame does not hang politely by the front door. It enters the kitchen, it waits in the hallway. It travels with the phone calls, the schedules, the money, the pressure, the old habits, the unfinished hurt. By the time Turner filed for divorce, another household had become a place where private pain had to be translated into legal language. Behind every public record was a quieter human scene. A dinner table where the conversation had changed, a child's room down the hall, travel bags ready again, a man who could stand in front of thousands and still struggle inside the rooms where no one was keeping score. Lakiha Kiki Spicer would later become Tyson's wife and an important companion in the long work of rebuilding daily life. But even that chapter cannot be treated like a clean rescue. Love did not erase what came before. It gave Tyson another place to try again, and trying again is rarely graceful. The deepest family grief came in 2009, with the loss of his young daughter Exodus after a home accident. Some details belong to the family's sorrow and should remain there. What can be held with respect is the shape of the silence around it. A hospital corridor under white light, a phone that no longer sounds the same, a child's room with toys still holding their place, a hallway lamp glowing as if the house had not changed forever, a father facing a pain no ring could contain. Tyson had spent his life learning how to meet force with force. Here, strength had no useful form. Money had no answer. Fame had no reach. The hands that had changed heavyweight history could not change the stillness waiting at home. For the public, Tyson had always been tied to impact. The punch, the fall, the roar. In that chapter, the image turns unbearably small, apparent in a room where every object remembers a voice. He continued to appear, continued to speak, continued to live, but a loss like that does not become part of a comeback. It remains under the floorboards of every later day. Boxing had taught Tyson how to survive danger in front of him. Family taught him that the hardest pain can arrive with no opponent, no bell, and no way to strike back. The world could keep calling him Iron Mike, but inside the house, there was only a man trying to stand in a place where the gloves meant nothing. The canvas in Tokyo looked colder once Mike Tyson was on it. For years, the world had watched men fall in front of him, watched fear move across other faces, watched the heavyweight division bend around his name. Against Buster Douglas in 1990, that image cracked in full public view. The count, the crowd, the stunned silence around ringside, it all seemed to slow down at once. In the dressing room afterward, the old certainty was gone. A towel lay across tired shoulders. Gloves sat open on a bench. Reporters waited outside with the first words of a new version of Mike Tyson's story. The public had seen the impossible made ordinary. Tyson could be knocked down, Tyson could lose, Tyson could leave the ring without the spell that had protected him. That night did more than change a record. It changed the way cameras looked at him. From then on, every entrance carried memory with it, and every bright light seemed to ask whether the legend was still whole. The legal case in Indiana, in 1992, created a far heavier public chapter. Court records, the conviction, and the years that followed placed Tyson's name inside a national conversation far beyond boxing. The language around him changed. It became colder, more permanent, more difficult to separate from the man and the fighter. There were courthouse corridors, dark suits, camera flashes, closed doors, and headlines that did not fade when the arena emptied. A boxer can train for a left hook, a referee's count, the pressure of a crowd. There is no gym drill for watching your name harden into a public judgment. Tyson returned to boxing later, but return is never the same as erasure. The robe could be put on again, the gloves could be laced again, the crowd could still rise. Yet part of the room had changed. He was no longer only the young champion from the black trunks. He had become a man followed by a long shadow over his public image, a shadow that stepped into every arena before he did. At the MGM Grand in 1997, the second fight with Evander Holyfield became another image that refused to stay inside the night it happened. The noise turned sharp. Referee Mills Lane moved through the confusion, and the replay on the big screen gave the crowd a version of the moment it could watch again before anyone in the ring had fully left it. The bout ended in disqualification, followed by disciplinary action from Nevada and damage to Tyson's standing in the sport. For the public, it became a famous replay, a clip, a headline, a shorthand attached to his name. For Tyson, it became another room he had to live inside long after the building cleared. That is the private weight of public collapse. The crowd remembers the instant, while the man carries the afterimage. A name that once meant victory now carried argument, stunned disbelief, and a kind of loneliness no championship belt could soften. Tyson could still sell tickets, still make people turn their heads, still fill a room with anticipation. But the name no longer protected him from paper, memory, consequence, and the quiet beginning of a career running out of places to hide. The bankruptcy papers did not sound like a bell, but they called Mike Tyson's name with a colder authority. By 2003, the fighter who had earned enormous sums through boxing, television, promotion, and some of the most watched nights in heavyweight history was standing in front of numbers that did not care how loud the arenas had once been. Debt, taxes, spending, divorce-related obligations, management pressures, and long-running disputes formed a circle around him. The lawsuit involving Don King belonged to that larger financial storm, another reminder that the business around a fighter can keep moving long after the fighter's best rounds are gone. There was no crowd in a lawyer's office, no ring walk, no roar swelling under the lights, just documents on a table, figures lined in black ink, and a former champion facing the strange humiliation of being measured by what was owed instead of what had been won. Somewhere in that picture, old posters still existed. Spinks, Holmes, Bruno, the great knights. But beside the paperwork, they looked like photographs from a different country. The belts had once made rooms feel smaller around him. The papers made the room feel too large. Money was only part of the fall. The deeper wound was identity. Tyson had lived by the rhythm of camps, weigh-ins, gloves, noise, correction, anger, and release. When the schedule thinned, and the old force no longer summoned the same certainty, the silence became its own opponent. A fighter's life is built from small rituals that the public rarely sees. Road work before daylight, the snap of a jump rope against the floor, tape pulled tight around the wrist, A trainer's voice cutting through fatigue. The scale waiting without mercy. The bag taking another round after the body wants to stop. When those rituals begin to lose their destination, the day changes shape. The calendar no longer gathers around a fight date. The morning does not know where to send the body. The old shoes stay by the wall a little longer. The phone rings less with camp business. A man who had been moved for years by bells, contracts, opponents, and lights begins to hear the sighs of his own house. In 2005, against Kevin McBride, the image was painfully plain. Tyson sat on the stool, the ring around him still lit, the audience still present, the bell still belonging to boxing. Yet something inside the old contract between fighter and arena had broken. He did not continue, and afterward the official career that had once seemed too powerful to imagine ending drifted into a long, closing silence. The moment did not need grand language. A mouthpiece near the corner. A towel across the shoulders. A trainer's hands waiting without much to fix. A pair of gloves that had once made history, now resting like objects after their purpose had passed. For a fighter, the hardest retirement is often the one the body and the world announce before the heart is ready to agree. Tyson's pain in that season was never only the loss of money or the end of a job. It was the loss of the version of himself the world had built and feared and paid to see. Once, he could step through ropes and know exactly who he was supposed to be. After the papers, after the stool, after the final stretch of the old career, that certainty thinned. A man can survive losing belts. He can survive losing applause. Living after the name no longer fits is harder. If the story had ended there, Tyson would have remained a warning carved in bright lights and empty accounts. Instead, a different kind of public life began to form slowly. One that asked him to sit down, speak, remember, and exist without proving himself through another round. The microphone looked small in front of Mike Tyson, almost fragile compared with the gloves that once made the world lean back. After the old career quieted, Tyson began appearing in places where the rhythm was different. The 2008 documentary Tyson allowed audiences to see pauses, memories, and contradictions that a fight broadcast could never hold. The hangover placed him unexpectedly back inside American pop culture, where people who had feared his name were suddenly laughing with it. Then came the one-man show Undisputed Truth, where the ring was replaced by a stage, and the old fighter stood under a single light with no opponent across from him. That may have been one of the more difficult arenas of his life. In boxing, silence before a punch can be useful. On stage, silence asks a man to stay with himself. The stool was gone. The ropes were gone. The crowd still looked at him, but now there was no round to win. Tyson did not become simple in that light. He became visible in a different way. Hotboxing later gave him another room, darker and slower, with a microphone where the gloves used to be. He could laugh, stop, look down, drift into memory, and return without the command of a bell. The camera sometimes caught him in those little spaces between speech, where the former champion seemed to be listening to an old version of himself from across the room. Tyson 2.0 carried his public image into business, a complicated extension of a name that had always drawn attention. The exhibition with Roy Jones Jr. in 2020 showed that the ring still had a hold on him, though now the return belonged partly to memory, partly to spectacle, partly to the old athlete's need to feel canvas under his feet again. The later event with Jake Paul kept that pull visible. Without changing the deeper truth, boxing remained near Tyson even when it no longer belonged to him the way it once had. Return of the Mic placed him back in a storytelling space, with Lakiha, Kiki Spicer helping shape the words around a life that had too often been shaped by others. The fighter who once answered questions with movement and impact was now trying to answer them with speech, timing, restraint, and the courage to leave some wounds unfinished. One of the quietest images belongs back in Catskill, near the beginning of the circle. Tyson returning to the place tied to Cus D'Amato, standing before young people connected to a scholarship bearing Cus's name, carries more weight than any clean ending could. A former champion in a familiar town. Students who know the legend before they know the boy. A name from the past placed into the hands of a younger future. That is not a cure. It is a thread. Tyson's later life did not erase Brownsville, Cus, the headlines, the family grief, the financial collapse, or the rooms where the lights went out too early. It gave him a way to keep walking with all of it. Some fighters keep competing with their bodies. Some keep competing with memory. Tyson moved between both. Older now, slower in some ways, still drawn toward the sound of the bell, yet learning that a man can remain alive after the crowd's loudest version of him has gone home. A young person asking for a photograph, a student hearing Cus's name, a room that waits for words instead of punches. These are smaller victories, quieter than knockouts, and perhaps harder for a man like Tyson to accept. They do not erase the old pain. They ask him to carry it with steadier hands. The old robe could hang quietly now, and still the room would know whose it was. Mike Tyson, at 60, stands far from the 20-year-old who shook the heavyweight world and made the name Iron Mike feel less like a nickname than a warning. The public still reaches for that name because it is easy to remember. Black trunks, fast hands, a stare across the ring. A young champion making history before most men understand the cost of being watched. The man left after that name is more difficult. His legacy holds greatness, controversy, discipline, loss, consequence, money, silence, family, age, and survival in the same pair of hands. He remains one of the most unforgettable fighters boxing has ever produced, the youngest heavyweight champion in history, and a figure whose life cannot be polished into one clean shape. After the 2024 event with Jake Paul, his name continued to appear around possible exhibitions and special events, including talk of a meeting with Floyd Mayweather that would need careful confirmation near any broadcast date. Even that uncertainty fits the later Tyson, still called by the ring, still surrounded by attention, still living beside a past that never fully sits down. The present should not be mistaken for a triumphant return to the old myth. Tyson walks with more years on him now. The speed that once frightened men belongs to film, memory, and the nervous excitement of people who saw it live. A glove in a glass case can preserve leather, but it cannot preserve breath. A stadium can replay a knockout, but it cannot give a man back the first version of his body, his family, his choices, or his quiet. The more honest image is smaller. Tyson looking toward a ring as if it is both home and witness, a place that made him and marked him. A dressing room without reporters, a robe still hanging, a pair of gloves that no longer need to be tightened for war. The city noise softened by age. Somewhere in that stillness, the pigeons return as more than a childhood detail. The boy from Brownsville once stood near their cages because their wings gave him a peace the streets did not. The older man may still understand that need. A living thing nearby, a sound gentler than applause, a place where no one asks him to become Iron Mike again. In that image, the story folds back on itself without closing. The frightened boy and the aging champion stand closer than the public ever knew. What remains is a man carrying both greatness and consequence. The public can keep the highlight reels, the belts, the stunned nights, the arguments, the old headlines. Tyson has to keep the rest. The rooms after the roar, the names that still hurt, the body that slowed, the lessons that arrived too late to protect the boy, but perhaps not too late to steady the older man. This is why his story still reaches people who remember boxing in smoke-filled living rooms, radio voices, pay-per-view nights, and old arenas where the crowd seemed to shake the walls. Tyson's life is a warning about fame, a lesson in discipline, a study of damage, and a portrait of a man who kept returning to the canvas in one form or another. If Mike Tyson's journey ever made you cheer, worry, remember, or forgive, leave a word of tribute below. Because behind Iron Mike, there was always Mike, a child from Brownsville, a fighter, a father, a survivor, and a man still listening for peace after the final bell.